Hi everyone, and welcome to the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability webinar. I'm Kathryn Walker. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to cover a few ground rules, especially for those of you who are new to WebEx. Because there are so many of you, all participants are currently in listen-only mode. At any time during the presentation, if you need help, you can post a question in the chat box on the side of your screen. We'll be happy to help you. At the end of the session, there will be a time for questions. You can either post questions in the Q&A section or in the chat box. If you don't want your name shared with your question, please type private before the question and we'll keep that private. You can also email questions to nccjdinfo@thearc.org. If we don't get to your question during the presentation, we'll follow up with you afterward. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. We will send you an email letting you know when it's available. We have one final request. You will receive a session evaluation after this webinar. Please take 5 minutes to complete and send it to us. This webinar is funded by the United States Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance. Thank you for your participation. The webinar today is a summary of NCCJD's first year, and I would like to welcome Program Manager Leigh Davis.
I think I'm up there now.
There you go.
All right, thank you. And thanks to everyone for being on the webinar today. We are excited to provide you with an opportunity to let you know a little bit more in depth of what we've been doing since we initially started. Wow, it's been actually over a year. And we've been able to cover a lot of ground since the center began. So we just want to give you this opportunity to learn more about what we've done and where we're headed for our final few months, and also what we're hoping to do in the future as well. We're definitely focusing on getting more funding for the center and looking at ways to support this mission. And you'll see that mission now on your screen. What we're wanting to do is really build the capacity of the criminal justice system to respond to these gaps that we keep seeing in the system over and over. And we've been seeing this in many different ways through our technical assistance requests, through INRs, and so we realize that if we don't find a way to bring together both the disability and criminal justice professionals to proactively work on this, then we're missing a big piece of the puzzle in figuring out how to really adequately address these issues. So that is our mission as a center, and these are some of the goals that we are focused on, that we've been working around, and starting with the website to INR, developing specific publications, and then also training. So what I'd like to do is go over each one of these individually and just talk about some of the things that we've been able to accomplish through this. And so our website, I hope that you've been able to see that, and I hope that you've been able to get some resources off of it as well. We created and launched our Pathways to Justice video, which is about a 4-minute video using both case scenarios and the Pathways to Justice model to explain why it's so important to be educating police officers, attorneys, victim service providers about this issue. So we were able to launch that recently and put that on our homepage, and if you want to go to the homepage, you can see it there. We've had over 700 views so far and hoping to see that number increase as word gets out about this really good resource. And it's not only for our chapters of the ARC who can take it to local police departments and others in the community, but it's for anyone who is interested in getting involved in this type of advocacy. And we've even gotten responses from parents who we've helped in cases involving adult children, where they've wanted to have a tool like this to take within their communities to really have something that's easy to use, that they can explain why this issue is so critical, and it's been an effective tool for them as well. Another big part of our website is creating this state-by-state map. And what's nice about the website is that we're trying to provide a way that you can get to resources either by looking at which state you're in, if you're looking for a specific state, or if you're a certain type of professional looking for resources. So you can get to that information in both of those ways through this website. And we've been providing blog posts. We've had our National Advisory Committee members provide different posts around victimization issues, death penalty issues, and we've had some chapters provide information as well. So we like to use that as a way to bring up the most timely issues and show how NCCJD is addressing those. And we also have a Facebook, and I hope that you would go to that and make sure that you follow us, and that way you can stay up to date on the latest issues that are in the media and the things that NCCJD is following as well. And a big push of what we're doing, because we are funded through BJA, is providing INR and technical assistance. And to date, we have served approximately 250 respondents who are needing assistance. And according to BJA and how they measure this, their TA is whenever you assist in cases over 60 minutes, that's considered a TA request. And we're finding that as we have been providing more of this direct service for people, that we are definitely getting more involved in the TA requests that are more complex and complicated and really require more specific attention to them and specific strategies around ways that we can assist families or attorneys or chapters that are needing help. So we are documenting each and every one of these and making sure that we provide this information to our funder, who really has the power to continue funding centers like these and funding different kinds of initiatives that are really getting to the core person who is needing this kind of assistance. Some other examples where we've been providing assistance more within systems is the White House Domestic Policy Council, where we've been asked to provide input. IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and we've been working with them in revising their model policy that helps officers know how to interact and communicate with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And here's a list of some others that have contacted us needing assistance. And what's exciting about this list is just to show the amount of interest that there is on this topic. You know, the ARC has been working within the area of criminal justice for a number of years, and there has not always been this interest around disability issues as there is today. And so we're really, you know, jumping in with both feet and making sure that we are responding to these with every bit of information we have, and making sure that people that are needing information such as these individuals have the information they need to make good decisions when it comes to serving people with disabilities when they get involved in the criminal justice system. So we've also been working on death penalty cases quite a bit, providing letters to the governor regarding people who have been suspects of crime. And we also have helped in developing individualized justice plans. And that's something that Kathryn will talk to you a little bit more in a minute, as she's been directly involved with some pretty high-profile cases in Virginia and other places. Also, we have been working on our publications, and this is really a big part of what we're doing, but as an update, we have completed our draft of the Pathways to Justice curriculum, which is a pretty comprehensive document because we are focusing on 3 different target audiences within the curriculum. We've completed 3 of the tip sheets that go along with that, focused on our target audiences, 7 different fact sheets are included, a wallet card for law enforcement, and then the conversation guide that was created to go along with our video so that if someone was wanting to use the video within their community, say within the police department, they would have a guide to take along with them in order to make the process easy to start the conversation around people with disabilities within the criminal justice system. And then we've conducted focus groups throughout this time as well to make sure that we are getting quality information, timely information around these issues. So we've worked with local law enforcement, national law enforcement. We've worked with victim service providers as well, and attorneys. So we have made sure that we're getting all the information needed in order to create something that is practical for each of our target audiences. And we're really excited about using local case scenarios. So when we go in to provide a training, or when a disability response team would provide a training, they would use case scenarios that are local to their community, so that it just makes it more likely that someone would be interested and engaged within the training itself. We've also had our National Advisory Committee review these materials. And as I mentioned before, we've been working with IACP in revising their model policy. And it's been a wonderful experience working with them because they have been able to incorporate the changes that we have suggested, and then we're able to use that model policy within the training that we are creating within the Pathways to Justice. And as you know, we have been conducting webinars, and many those of you on the call today have been involved in these. So we have now made it to the 11 webinar mark, and with over 1,500 attendees in that. And I want to remind you that we still have the archived webinars available on our website, and some of those have been very well received. Some of the topics are on issues that you might not find other places. So if you would want to take a look at those, there's some pretty interesting topics that are covered throughout this webinar series. And I listed some of these here just to give you an idea of what we've been offering. And if there's something here that interests you, I just encourage you to go back and take a look at those and watch those at your convenience. And as I was mentioning before, I just wanted to give you a little overview of the Pathways to Justice training, since this has been the meat of what we've been working on here and really trying to get ready for our piloting of this coming up in March. So this is an overview of all of the different modules and how we would start off with the training, which is basically a day-long training. Is provide an overview of what the disability response team is and who they are. And what's critical to the way that we're structuring this training, and what's really foundational to this, is creating what's called a disability response team. And that is a collection of people in the community within criminal justice and disability who come together to provide training for people, others in their community. So when we're going in to do a training, we are asking our chapter of the ARC to invite a local law enforcement officer, an attorney, public defender, prosecutor, and also victim service provider, so that they are in fact a part of the training when we go in and do the initial kickoff training in their community. And that way we're creating buy-in at the get-go. We know that many times if training is provided, it's usually people want it done by someone within their own profession. And we also know that including people with disabilities themselves is very key to our success with this program. So we are making sure that everyone involved who we are training is at the front and providing this training as well. And so we're just excited to see how this is going to work in our first pilot in Maryland, and we'll make sure that we give you updates as we go along and just the different findings that we see as we roll out this program. Our next module is looking at disability basics, and then for the next 3 modules there for our target audiences, we'll actually break those up into separate sessions. where we can work specifically with that target audience on issues that are specific to their profession. And then at the last, we'll come back and develop a Pathways to Justice plan. And this can be done either at the individual level, because there's certain things that an officer, for example, could do to improve his ability to work with people with disabilities, or it could be done on a systematic level so that the community itself is looking at ways to actually change systems so that they are able to better serve either suspects or offenders or victims with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that is an overview of the training itself. And then just to give you a taste of some of the handouts that are included in that, Kathryn's going to now show you the attorney tip sheet and explain how that will be used in the training.
All right, hi everyone. Let's see if we can get the tip sheet up here. There we are. So this is one of the handouts that we will be using in the modules that Leanne was just showing you that are profession specific, and this particular handout will be targeted to our attorney audience. And the front page that you're looking at here basically addresses 5 areas that if we only had a second with an attorney and we could just hand them one sheet of paper, these are 5 areas that we really want them to consider, particularly regarding people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you can see here on the handout, number 1, people with IDD are vulnerable at every stage in the criminal justice system. And you can kind of take a look at our video that we had and then the model that I'm going to show you guys on the upcoming slides and see what we mean when we're talking about cracks in the system. Number 2, if competency issues are even remotely possible, test. Often people with a lower IQ or with intellectual or sometimes developmental disabilities don't understand what's happening to them in the criminal justice system. They'll be found incompetent to proceed, and it really changes the way criminal proceedings look for them. There are similar issues for witnesses. So if you've been a victim of a crime and you may not be competent to testify, or a defense attorney may be telling you you're not competent to testify, but in fact you are. So these are just some of the issues that we want attorneys to be aware of. The ability of people with low IQ to effectively waive their Miranda rights. That's your right to an attorney and your right to remain silent and all of those great rights, and often they get waived without people really understanding what they're doing. False confessions. You've seen on our website some of the work of Bob Persky with false confessions that eventually led to executions. And now, obviously, those are the most serious of the false confessions, but they're an issue across the spectrum. And finally, sex offenses by a person with IDD are often not the result of sexual deviance. So a lot of times sex offenses for this population are not the kind that society is typically worried about, and we want to make sure that attorneys are taking appropriate steps to make sure that effective treatment is found. That's the front page here, and then let's flip it over to the back. So what this is a summary of the 3 things that we're asking these professionals to do: identify, communicate, and accommodate. And this is all material that's found throughout our modules and is targeted, this particular bit is targeted to attorneys, and it talks about, just a real quick reference checklist for them for identification, communication, and accommodation for an individual with an intellectual or developmental disability. So I'm going to head back over to the PowerPoint now, and the next thing we're going to do, what you see on your screen now, is our Pathways to Justice model. So when I was talking earlier about cracks in the system, this is our illustration of the criminal justice system that we're using to kind of help professionals talk about and think about where in the system someone with a disability really might be falling through the cracks. So this version that you're looking at is what we call our 2-tiered version. The middle line where it says community, first contact, investigation, etc., that's our first tier. And then the flowchart lines are tier 2. And then you can see a yellow triangle in the background indicating the number of people in the system. So the triangle is colored heavier on the left side of the screen because more people interact with the criminal justice system at first contact, and then it kind of filters out through investigation, jail, trial and plea agreement, transition, and then back into the community. That number gets lower and lower. The top of the pathway here is for suspects and offenders, and it talks about their journey through the system, often with someone calling 911, and then law enforcement arrives and they're arrested, and then in the investigation stage they end up in initial detention and they make their first appearance in court. And then with jail, there are issues around pretrial detention and whether the person is safe in jail, and then bail and bond is often looks really different for somebody that only gets a Social Security check than it does for somebody with more resources. So effectively, for a lot of people with disabilities, bail and bond can then keep them in jail before they've even been to trial. And then in the next intercept, trial and plea agreement, there are issues in court with taking plea deals and then with diversion programs as well. And then finally, in transition, jail, incarceration, and prison, there are, again, a plethora of issues there. And so basically, this is just a very short outline for criminal justice professionals to start discussing where a suspect or offender might have issues in all of these various areas. And then on the bottom, you see our victim witness pathway. And again, their first contact will be with 911, or they could make a complaint through their local law enforcement agency, and then law enforcement gets involved. At the investigation stage, there are often issues with communication with forensic interviewers, not necessarily understanding the needs of somebody with an intellectual or developmental disability, and then charges are either filed or not. And so that's another issue that we're seeing is sometimes if the case doesn't look that easy or that winnable, charges aren't even filed. And then while the suspect or offender is in jail, the victim has to know to assert their rights and find out, is that person out of jail? And they have to help attorneys prepare for trial. During trial and plea agreement, witnessing and testimony are two big issues because a lot of times people that don't communicate in what we would consider a typical way are discounted or treated poorly as they testify in court. And then also they need to file in some places what's called a crime victims notification request, which has the prosecutor kind of follow up with them as the case comes to a close and make sure they know what's going on in their own case. And then transition on the victim witness side is all about coping and then prevention of future similar incidents, because all too often we'll see somebody that was a victim of crime and then they're a victim of the same crime again later. So it's all about coming up with a good strategy there and making a prevention plan. So that's just a little outline of our Pathways to Justice model. We don't necessarily think this is a completely inclusive model. There are certainly things that we could add, things that we could take away, but we see this really as a discussion starter and as a way to start talking about things in a structured way in your community. So what I'm going to do next is walk you through a case study, and this is one that we are both using in our training and also have a blog article following up on it, so that way if you're curious you can go read a little bit more about it. So what you can see on the bottom of the screen is the Pathways to Justice model that we were just looking at, and right now first contact is highlighted. So we're going to start with the facts leading up to arrest. And Jack has an intellectual and developmental disability. He recently moved to a new group home. Jack got into a verbal altercation with another resident, and a third resident called 911. When police arrived, Jack attempted to leave the situation and, in the process, struck a police officer who grabbed him by the hoodie from behind. While Jack was on the ground with officers attempting to handcuff him, one of the officers threatened to tase Jack if he did not cooperate. So what we have here is a 911 emergency call, and officers get to the scene, and maybe they know it's a group home, maybe they don't. Jack is attempting to leave a situation, which is probably a coping mechanism that he's been taught to use when he feels overwhelmed, and officers, of course, are not okay with this. So even just in this first brief interaction, there are several things that we're hoping in this first contact box that law enforcement officers will talk about. There we go. Now we're on to the investigation stage. Jack was read his Miranda rights without assistance and did not understand what he was agreeing to. His parents were never called during his time in jail or during the investigation. So this is another instance of somebody with an intellectual and developmental disability wanting to cooperate and trying to work with the arresting officers and not really understanding what was happening to him. So then we have the jail intercept, and Jack spent 24 hours in jail without support or access to his medication. His parents called and spoke to the supervisor of the adult detention centers to inform them of Jack's needs, and Jack's parents were told that their son should have told the nurse himself about his needs and given his pharmacy information. So you can see right here that the standard that this adult detention center is holding Jack to is not necessarily something he can meet, and as a result, he spends 24 hours in a strange place with no medication, without having seen his parents, and all of this before he is even convicted of anything. So Jack spent 24 hours in jail. Now we're at the trial and plea agreement stage. Jack was assigned a public defender the day he went to bond court. Initially, the judge wanted $30,000 for bond, but at the public defender's request and after talking to the family about whether they could afford the $1,000 on a $10,000 bond, he reduced it to $10,000. Jack was out on bond when he had a competency evaluation and was found unfit to stand trial. So you can see here, this is a really good example of the judge taking into account what the family could do, seeing that Jack was probably a low risk for flight and reducing the bond so that the family could manage it. The state attorney refused, however, to dismiss the charges, so the public defender sent Jack for a second evaluation regarding his sanity at the time of the event. Jack went to the same state-appointed psychologist who had seen him earlier for his competency evaluation. Jack was found not sane at the time of the incident. So we have two different things going on here. The first, where Jack was found incompetent to stand trial. So that means he's not able to aid in his own defense, and therefore he can't stand trial. So he had to go through an entire evaluation process for that to happen. But then the state attorney, the prosecutor, refused to dismiss the charges even after that happened. So Jack remains in the criminal justice system, had to go back and see the same professional again for a second evaluation, this time to say that not only was he incompetent to stand trial, but he was also insane at the time he committed an offense, which is a separate issue in the criminal justice system. So again, the judge obviously made some accommodations for Jack, but when the state attorney refused to do so, he remained in the system even longer. And here's some additional information. Jack's charges were eventually dismissed. His parents called NCCJD and had a great advocate at the state chapter of the ARC. Together with Jack's service providers, they put together a personalized justice plan detailing the services Jack receives. The plan was given to the public defender, who presented it to the court. The judge assured that Jack would receive appropriate services, dismissed the charges. Jack was arrested in mid-March of 2014, and the case was finally dismissed in mid-October. That's a lot of months and a lot of anxiety and a lot of resources from Jack and his family and the state chapter of the ARC. And there were almost monthly hearings where everyone involved dealt with immense stress. And so we have a quote down here from Jack. He said, "My heart was racing 290 because I was in the back of a squad car handcuffed." And then at the police station, "I pretty much felt like a nervous wreck." And then when he was at the adult detention center, "I felt sick to my stomach because I was around people I didn't know." And then a couple of days before court, "I felt scared and nervous." And at court, "I felt scared I was going to jail." And then on the last day of court, "The judge calmly talked to me and explained what would happen the next time I got in trouble." And when the case was finally dismissed, Jack said, "I was still edgy. I feel more calmly now that it's all over." So you can see pretty clearly that this had a huge impact on Jack, even though eventually the case was dismissed. So while we would call this a successful outcome because there were accommodations made and eventually the charges were dismissed, you can see here as we walk you through it, it's not without, Jack has to live with this experience for the rest of his life. And so for more on this story, you can see our blog on the ARC's website, and here's the web address for it. I'll also put a link to that in the chat box. And also, just as a quick aside, I've put a link to both our Facebook page and to our webinar archive in the chat box if you guys are interested. So I'm going to pass it back over to Leanne.
All right, thank you, Kathryn, and thank you for just taking us through Jack's case scenario. And I think that gives you a little better taste of sort of how the training would go when we're going to these different pilots throughout 2015. We're really looking at using case scenarios too, as I said before, that are going on within those specific communities in a way to address, address issues that are throughout their community or throughout their state, but using a case that most people are familiar with there. And then using that as a way to really gain interest around this topic. And as Kathryn was telling you earlier, there's just so many ways that something could go wrong. And we are getting those calls, and even though this has been going on for many, many years before the National Center started, we are now able to document these cases and really show from our other chapters and from other attorneys out there who are working cases like these, just at what level some of the serious injustices that are going on, and really wanting to just provide some strong education around that to give people the tools they need in order to do this work successfully, and so that they don't feel alone in trying to take on these issues by themselves. So just to give you a taste of what we're doing in 2015, as I mentioned, we will be having our pilot training, and we'll start in Maryland, and we've got one in South Carolina, New Jersey, Colorado, and Washington. And we've been working with each one of those chapters to prepare for their training, working to develop their disability response teams so that when they get there, there will already be a strong network in place to provide this training, and then a strong network to continue the training once the initial training day is over. So we are working on that. And then another exciting thing to add to the website is we are focusing on getting as many names and as much legislation as we can to put into a database on our website. We get calls from people asking for help on different cases, people needing expert witnesses to help explain to the court and what intellectual developmental disability is, autism, how does that affect my clients, how does that affect someone who has a sex offense. There is a need for that out there, and there really is no way to find that, and we would like to collect that information and make that available to our target audiences and others needing that. And we want to find out what's going on this issue with regard to legislation, and really start keeping a list of that so that we can easily pinpoint what's going on and where, and look at model legislation that other states can then take and use for their own purposes as well. We've got some conferences coming up. The ARC of California Public Policy Conference will be presenting about NCCJD. And we're excited to go to the American Jail Association and give a presentation there regarding screening in prisons and just really helping the correctional officers understand more about what intellectual developmental disability is and how they would provide accommodations within that setting. And then in Maryland, we have a Disability Law Symposium that we will be speaking at as well. And so we've got those two to schedule, as well as our pilots. And then we have 3 final webinars. We originally were looking at continuing the webinars throughout 2015, but because we have been able to get such a great response and large number of the webinars in our first year, we decided to turn our focus on developing these 3 white papers. And what's exciting about this is we're going to be launching the white papers and disseminating those on the same day that we'll be holding the webinars on the same topic. So that way we're hoping to draw a larger audience on this. And our first one will be on violence, abuse, and bullying. And that will happen in April, on April 30th. And then we'll also have one on sex offenders with intellectual developmental disabilities, and then finally one on juvenile justice issues. And these are some themes that we've been seeing, whether it's from our National Advisory Committee, input from them, input that we're getting because of the types of TA requests that we're getting, these are some themes that have been coming up over and over within the services and that we've been providing throughout since we've had the National Center. So we really want to hone in on those and make sure that we are addressing each one of these issues at every angle. So if you have any input on any of those, we're still taking suggestions around what are some core topics within each of these issues that the center needs to be addressing. We would love to hear from you, so feel free to give us a shout through our email and let us know if there's anything specific that you would like to hear within each one of these 3 white papers and webinars. So that wraps it up for our upcoming goals, and now we'd like to just open it up for any questions that any of you might have. We'd like to provide any answers on that. So, and this can be anything related to this particular presentation that we just gave, or anything within past presentations as well on other topics. So let's see if anyone has any questions for us.
Leanne, we got a question from Amy Newell, and she's curious about the IACP policy that you were talking about, and she's wanting to know if that policy will be available to local agencies.
Oh, that's a great question. So we are working with IACP, and they have their own timeline on when things will be finalized and completed. And at our last, with our last communication with them, they have actually just had that, their committee had just met to approve that. So they don't have it in final form yet. But yes, once it is finalized, we are going to use it within our own training and make sure that the officers there within the training have copies of that. But it will be available on IACP's website. They'll list it there. And they want it to be widely used. So yes, it will be available. And if you need more specific information on that, I can talk to you directly and let you know exactly when that date will be, because we're still waiting on that as well. Our materials are currently still under review, our training materials with BJA, our funder. So once we get a couple of pilots under our belts, we'll definitely have more of the information able to give out and on our website at that time.
And we're excited too, Amy, because Leanne, she just let me know that she's with a chapter of the ARC, and they are already working with their state's attorney's office and local police departments. So
great.
I'm sure they'll find it very interesting.
Yeah.
Here's another question. What is an example of a successful information referral or TA request you've fielded? So, Leanne, I'm going to take that one. And real fast, anyone listening, you can put questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and you can also email us if you have questions that we don't get to. So, about a successful INR or TA. NCCJD was recently pretty involved with a case in Virginia of Reginald Neely Latson. He was a young black man whose first interaction with law enforcement came when he was outside of a public library waiting for it to open. And what police didn't realize is that Mr. Latson had autism. And so when they got a call about a suspicious person, all they saw was a young teenager hanging out, and they went over to question him. And eventually, Neely reacted very poorly and ended up injuring an officer in the confrontation. And the prosecutor in that area did decide to press charges. Neely took a plea deal and ended up in a group home setting, and then through an extended fact pattern, continued to have clearly disability-related involvement with law enforcement that was not good. And it was a very tough fact pattern for us to see, because there really was no underlying crime. It was just continually him not having the skills necessary to interact in a way that law enforcement were expecting, and law enforcement not having the skills to recognize that it was in fact disability related and not as in the least malicious. So throughout that, Neely ended up in solitary confinement in a Virginia jail and was sitting there for, I think, a little over a year in a cell with, part of the time in a crisis cell. That's what they call cells where people go with mental health issues, which means a grate in the floor and a mattress, no TV, no radio, no books, no windows, nothing for all but about an hour a day. And so Neely was stuck in that situation for quite some time, and we started working with his attorneys and with the ARC of Virginia, who did some fantastic advocacy on his behalf, and ended up writing several letters, getting some great press coverage on the issue, and eventually got the Virginia governor to grant a conditional pardon for Neely, and now he is headed to a facility, a forensic facility, a locked facility in Florida, but one that has services for people with disabilities, and the hope is that he will be able to get what he needs and make a road to recovery and get back out in the community. And we have, sorry, I just hit the mute button. We have one more question here. What are some future funding opportunities we're looking at?
Oh, I can take that one. We definitely are really working hard on this one. It's exciting to, it's basically seed money when you start off a national center at the level that we're wanting to take this. We've only got a few more months. It feels like a few more days, but it's quite a bit longer than that, to look at how to continue doing the work through the National Center. So we are looking at every angle. We're looking at our current funder, if there's ways to continue doing work through with their support, as well as different foundations, such as Public Welfare Foundation, some of the foundations that really have been more focused on criminal justice and not as much disability, and looking at different ways that we can explain to them what a great issue this is to look at in terms of topics around alternatives to sentencing, looking at juvenile justice issues. And I think we still haven't fully, clearly explored, going to foundations that are focused on those kinds of topics and really letting them understand the issues around disability. And once they do, there does seem to be interest there around working together and figuring out ways to reduce incarceration rates, making sure that people are in the best place for them, and looking at how disability really does affect our overall prison population and people who are more susceptible or more at risk to becoming involved in the criminal justice system. So we're looking at every possible angle, and on that note, that's why we just really appreciate you being on the webinar today and all the support that you've given this National Center, whether it's through our National Advisory Committee, serving on that, or at a chapter. And, our hope is that we will be here for a long time and that we'll be able to continue to provide these services and work with you and just continue to really give this issue the attention that it needs and deserves. So I think that was our last question. Kathryn, did we have any other ones?
We've got one more. This question is from James Holden. He says, I do competency training in the jail and the community as an alternative to the defendant waiting 6 to 12 months in jail, awaiting an opening at the State Developmental Center Competency Training Program. It is highly successful. Are you aware of other programs like this? And James, I think our answer is not specifically, and we would love to hear more from you about what you're doing. One of the interesting things from our perspective is about this whole world of competency restoration, because it's very different for somebody with, say, mental illness who may take medication, get the training, and then become competent. And we are not sure that that's always the case for people with intellectual disability in particular. So we would love to hear more about the work you're doing and the success you're having. So please follow up with us.
And in fact, those are exactly the kind of programs that we would like to put on our website. When we do find resources we want to get the information out as much as we can about where these different kinds of resources exist. And so please let us know how we can put that, how you would like that worded. We'll need to get the information from you directly, but we want to be able to provide that to people that come to our website looking just for that kind of information.
All right, and I think that was our final question, unless anybody has anything else. All right, well, you can see up on the screen here that our next webinar, Leanne was talking about it earlier, will be on April 30th, and you can look for an announcement a little closer to time. And you can sign up to receive email alerts from NCCJD. Please use our information referral and our technical assistance service and refer others that may need that kind of help. And share your story and raise awareness by contacting us at nccjdinfo@thearc.org. And there should be a survey popping up shortly after the webinar, so please take a minute to fill that out and let us know what you thought, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks.
All right, thanks everyone.